Welcome to the Ruffells ad break, the first of the Ruffells Roughcasts. I'm Tim McInnes, Managing Director. In this podcast, we dig into how the creatives we work with get the most out of every brief to deliver best results for you. At Ruffells, we're all about the people, and when we're working with best in breed, it's easy to get great results. We also reckon that when the majority of our effective brain time is spent at work, you might as well enjoy the ride. Joining us this episode is Alex Goff, video editor and all-round lovely man. I worked with Alex in London during the mid-2000s and managed to nab him while he was on holidaying with his family. In this episode, we talk about how video editing is like making a sculpture, gold mining in the Yukon, and how advertising done right works on multiple levels. But less from me and more from Alex.
Ruffells
ad break.
6 out of 10.
Thank you.
Ruffells ad break.
Have you seen that meme, which is client thinks video is shot, now edit it, and it's one button, done.
Yeah, basically that's where I was coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So is that what why you think you've found yourself now editing documentaries and stuff? We'll talk about that in a wee bit.
Yes.
But do you think that's why you've gone more from being in the commercial space and commercial and corporate editing, and you're now finding yourself back in the storytelling space? Or
well, depending on what way you look at it, I've been very relaxed about my career path. That can be a good thing or a bad thing. I haven't really particularly, I've just always followed my nose. If I like the people and I like the kind of work they do, then I carry on working with them.
Yeah.
And then eventually the phone rings and someone else who for some reason I've ended up in their little black book calls me up, and then I go and work for them. And that's really all I've ever done. A handful of times, mostly with like people's passion projects. That's when I've made a conscious decision to go and do something that's tended to be more documentary in nature. But I have always liked having a foot in both camps. I want to do commercial stuff and I want to do more kind of, documentary stuff really.
Yeah.
That's currently what I'm trying to balance with commercial work.
Yep.
I want to do both.
Yeah. Can we talk then a little bit about obviously when you started in the industry, once you first learned what an editor was, you were an edit assistant, and were you working with Dave Barry quite a bit?
Yeah.
At that time, we had a couple of we had a senior editor and we had
John Pape.
John Pape
was the other one.
Yeah, and then you were kind of the conduit between. And Dave Barry is probably he's probably way more famous for other things, but the most famous thing for me was that he was the editor of Teletubbies.
Yes, I think the first episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was his claim to fame, and I sort of thought to myself, I've arrived.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm working with Dave Barry of Teletubbies fame. Do you have a favourite Teletubby?
No, they've all, I couldn't even tell you which is which now. They all have tellies in their stomachs.
Tinky Winky?
Yeah.
Lala?
Say Tinky Winky. I mean, Tinky Winky sounds like a penis, so let's go with that.
Right, let's go with that. So I digress because that's really nothing to do with the story, but I thought it was a humorous aside, so I went there. I was brave.
Dave Barry was amazing because he'd been doing that job since before the days of computerized editing.
Yeah.
So he was someone who still thought in terms of considered cuts. He wasn't, the way I edit is like most people edit now. If you're working on a scene that is kind of, you're trying to get something kinetic or if you're trying to make a scene that feels visually exciting or dynamic, you quite often end up making all these like very sharp micro cuts, undoing what you've done, redoing it, undoing it. He came from an era where you couldn't do any of that.
Yeah.
You had to think about it, and then you thought about it some more, and then you made your cut. And so
You quite literally cut the film.
Yeah,
and
you quite
spliced it
literally
back together.
physically cut your film, and you could put it back together if you wanted with a little bit of glue and some tape. But it means that you approach editing in a completely different way. You're completely considered about everything you do. You look much further forward, and it has its downsides and its upsides. But it's a great way to learn because the guy had really thought deeply about it, and editors of that era had to think deeply about what they were doing. There wasn't another way of doing it. You couldn't just like throw it at the wall until it stuck.
And completely unflappable. There was nothing. I don't think. I think a couple of occasions I might have seen him a bit frustrated that perhaps he didn't have what he was after, but he was unflappable. There was always a workaround.
Yeah,
and he would focus on a particular shot, which would sell the scene.
Yeah,
and so he would say, "That's the shot. Now we build this scene around that shot."
Yeah, he always had a clear. Well, he taught me everything. He taught me I still use today, really, in terms of. He said to me that editing is like sculpture. So you start with a big block. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a big square block, and you start to knock the edges off it. You've got a vague idea of the shape you want, and eventually, maybe you're making out a head, maybe a leg. It's not really there, but you're starting to see this shape emerge. And then you start to whittle away at these corners, and then you start to refine. And that's still the way that I think of it.
Yeah.
And it's a really good way of not being, if you're working with a huge amount of footage, say in a documentary, it's a really good way of not being intimidated by this, the blank page moment where you just go, oh, I don't know what this is. Yep. This doesn't mean anything. It's just a load of crap. Everything's a load of crap when you start. And you just keep trimming, keep knocking away the edges, and before you know it, it turns into something. And once it turns into something, then you're on a roll. And that's I think he taught me that the first week I worked with him, really.
Yeah.
And it's still how I think about it.
How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Got to start. Hopefully not eating elephants these days, though. 2022.
Hopefully not.
I mean, it seems a little bit irresponsible, to be honest, but we understand the metaphor.
Mm.
Did you have a moment where you sort of thought to yourself, I've got to be involved in the creative industries? Or I mean, did it harass you, or did you go and harass the idea?
Probably a bit of both. I think I found it accidentally. I was actually working in a bar before I got that runner's job. And the reason I got the runner's job was somebody who worked in that office knew there was a job going, knew I was working in a bar, said, do you want to be a runner? I said, okay. And I enjoyed the environment. And I just decided to stay in the environment because I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And I was interested in film and, the arts generally before that. But yeah, like I say, it was always journalism.
Yeah.
So I felt quite lucky that I'd fallen into it. I think when you're younger, you can feel so much pressure to have a thing that you're aiming for and to be driven to be this thing. I need to be an astronaut, and I am going to be an astronaut. But I never really felt that about anything other than journalism. And so when I found this other somewhat different thing, it actually uses a lot of, editing uses a lot of the same parts of your brain as writing does.
Yeah.
But yeah, I felt fortunate that I'd found this thing. And also I felt fortunate that the part of why I also became an editor, I'm just remembering this, is that Dave Barry was the guy who got paid the most on that whole crew.
Yeah. Well,
and I was like, well, I like this environment and this guy gets paid the most, so I want to be that guy.
Yeah.
Not that I was tremendously driven by money, but it's not always the most high-paying industry. And so with a little bit of pragmatism, you do look around and go, okay, well, that guy seems pretty non-expendable. And that's reflected in how he gets paid. So that was definitely part of my thinking as well. Yeah.
I remember walking in a few mornings, and I was doing early starts.
Mm.
You were still there. You hadn't left all night.
Yeah.
You were doing night shift, sleeping, and where was it? Where was the office? It was in
the Docklands in London,
Docklands,
which was a pretty nondescript industrial part of London.
Yeah.
Like there wasn't anything. Well, it was next to Canary Wharf, so there were bars sort of 15 minutes
walk, yeah. But there was not very much.
Yeah, and the reason I was there all night was because back then there was one Avid.
You were conforming, weren't you?
Yeah, there wasn't really shared media servers and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So you had to do the work on the workstation that the editor was working on. And if the editor stayed till 10 o'clock at night, then you didn't start your work until 10. So I spent a weird...
Putting physical tapes into machines
Yes.
and finding
Yeah,
time
yeah.
codes and
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and just loads of weird IT problem solving that nowadays I think you have edit assistant groups on social media and stuff. You didn't really have any of that then.
No.
There was this one internet forum called Creative Cow full of grumpy old grumpy old farts who were not good at sharing their knowledge.
They were sharing hate.
Yeah, so there was a lot of struggling through the night to try and solve a problem. Then the editor coming in the morning and going, "Oh yeah, you just press that button."
Just push that button.
Yeah.
So don't you feel sorry for those generations coming through now where everything's really straightforward? It's just different problems,
I don't know. I think about this quite a lot. I think it's quite hard to break through as an editor now because you're less likely to have this kind of... For a start, a lot of editors, depending on the size of the production, a lot of editors end up being their own assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And that means there's often not really the same amount of space for an assistant and an editor to work together and then for that knowledge to get passed over.
Yeah.
So as a result, obviously what you can do is you can go and buy a Mac for $1,000 or $2,000. You can get some software.
You're talking pounds, not New Zealand dollars, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
More.
So what is it? $4,000, $5,000 for a
Depends on what you're
pretty,
Yep.
pretty zippy Mac.
Yeah, zippy.
Yeah. Which is still a lot of money to get started with.
But it's attainable.
But it's attainable. It's like the Avid back in the day, it was like a £50,000 machine.
Yeah, it
so
was.
like $100,000 machine. Mm-hmm. And it just wasn't realistic to get access to that as an individual. You had to be in a production company.
You did.
And then that meant that by being in that production company, you would have contact with people who knew what they were doing and you went from there.
Yep.
Whereas nowadays, I guess there's a lot of... You can immediately publish yourself on YouTube. You can collaborate with people all around the world. All this stuff is in a way easier, but it's easier to do something that is maybe sort of without restriction, without rules, and therefore a bit indulgent, you know?
Yeah, and I think actually
you're not making a product for someone,
Yeah.
which is a big part of how you end up actually having a career and making money.
I think that's shown. I can think of real life examples of that where people have ended up in the roles that they are in because other people have left, not because they were qualified. And so when those people are in the decision making seat, it's bloody dangerous because they then have grown up looking at or creating content on their phones or knowing the smallest amount about managing social media or what have you. And now they think that they're qualified because it's been successful. But I think I always liken it to, when the DSLRs came out. So, I mean, I was alive when the internet was invented, so I remember DSLRs coming out, and they were fantastic. I remember the Canon 5D Mark I changed the game. The landscape changed. The cameras came out. They were fantastic out of the box. If you put that on auto and autofocus on the lens and stuff like that, you get a really good picture.
Yeah.
You get a really good video. High, I think it was it wasn't 422, it was 420 or something like that. But it was a good picture, right?
Yeah.
And I remember we were doing a TV commercial and we just got a 5D and we'd gone from a $60,000 camera to a $5,000 camera.
Yeah.
We just swapped the lens out and it was sat on top of a Panther Techno crane on a dolly with big 20-foot sails, and we had an art department. We recreated 1938 Holland with actors and costumes and wardrobe, with the props and a marketplace and all this kind of stuff. And on the top of this thing is this little 5D, this tiny wee camera. So everything changes, everything changes really quickly.
Yeah.
And so whether that's the technical skills that, editors or whomever it is coming through the industry, you still have to have that network of professionals who can support whatever the technology is and whatever you have to learn on the way to get there. But like you say, if you don't have a group of people around you in a production company or freelancers who are coming in to service those requests, where do you start? It's pretty tricky. But you've had you've had a good run. You know,
Yes.
like you said, you followed your nose. You've always
Yeah.
been stuff in front of you. So what would we have heard about that you've worked on over the last sort of 10 years?
Probably the thing that probably would have got the most eyeballs on it around the world is probably a TV show called Gold Rush, which is a TV show about gold miners in Canada, Alaska.
In the Yukon,
The Yukon, right? Yeah. And it's a reality show. It's massive in America. It's like Discovery's biggest rated show, I think. And it's made entirely or almost entirely by a British production staff. And the production company is a British production company, and they do all the post in London. The reason that's happened, I think, is historically it started as a kind of, the first series was more of a sort of observational documentary, really. So I think the original crew was only kind of 3 or 4 people. I think I'm right in saying that. And then it kind of mushroomed into this enormous reality show, really. It's like a reality show with an observational documentary sensibility, I suppose you might call it.
Yeah.
And it now spans like these enormous mine sites in the Yukon, and the characters are like superstars over there.
Bigger than life.
Yeah, and they're real like American archetypes. It's like a sort of modern day, well, it's Gold Rush. It's modern day people risking it all to go out there and you know, scrabble about in a gold field and then lose all their money.
To strike it large.
Or strike it large.
Yeah.
So that thing is enormous, and I worked on that as a assistant producer, not as a editor. I did do a little bit of work in the edit on that, but mostly as an assistant producer. And I worked on that for about 3 years. The reason I got that job was I was standing in a pub at the bar moaning to a friend about being an editor and never seeing the daylight, and how it was kind of getting me down that I was spending too much time in a room on my own. And some guy tapped me on the shoulder and said, I work on a show called Gold Rush. I'm looking for new people to go out there. Are you interested? So like 2 days later, I was interviewing with him in his office. And then about a month later, I was on a plane to the Yukon. And I did it really because I just thought, well, why wouldn't you?
Why not?
Like, it wasn't the natural career progression thing to do, but it was just going to be a laugh. And I got paid, I think I got paid like per week about half what I would get in London editing.
Yeah.
But the opportunities that's indirectly opened out for me, if I trace the jobs that I've done recently, and I trace who I met, you know, the contacts that got me there and the type of work that I show them to get the next job, actually a lot of it has come back to saying yes to that bloke in that pub about going to the Yukon for no good reason, really, other than I thought it'd be a laugh. It was like technically not the right career move, but actually it was a good career move.
And the breadth of experience that you got from your time there doing that.
Yeah,
role.
it definitely made me a better editor. It made me more sympathetic to people who work in production, who are trying to like get the footage under pressure, dealing with difficult people, dealing with you know, time constraints, weather, all the chaos that happens in the real world when you're shooting. The classic thing for an editor is to sit there moaning about, oh, I didn't get this shot, they didn't get that shot. And I'm not one of those people because I've been there for long enough that I know that if you got anything at all, it was a good day.
Yeah.
And now you've got to make something out of it.
Yeah.
So I'm quite sympathetic to that side of things.
Yeah.
Which probably makes me more bearable to sit in an edit suite with, because I'm not that guy
Yeah.
who's giving you shit about what you didn't do.
Well, I think it's really easy to, when you're focusing on the job at hand, it's really easy to, you know, get quite macro about, you know, servicing that role and forget that everybody else has got their role to do too. So, I mean, I think it's definitely, they're complementary skills. So,
and editing is by nature, you concentrate intensely and you shut out the outside world and you get into what you're doing. So it doesn't necessarily lend itself always to the type of characters that are the most collaborative or just, like, frankly, the easiest to get along with sometimes. Some editors are a slightly kooky breed.
Some.
A little bit grouchy.
Lots.
The occasional one. Yeah.
Lots.
I need to defend my people here. But,
No, but I think that's true. But, you know, you've got the awareness to be able to say it. So,
yeah.
you know, So, I think that's true. And I think, generally you've got account leads who are bubbly and, like to have conversations, and you've got directors who are probably a little bit OCD and things have to be a certain way. But I think if you take a little bit from, everyone's page, then you probably end up being a reasonably well-rounded, practitioner wherever it is that lands.
Yeah, I think so. I think the more you can move outside of whatever your specialism is, it's only going to improve what you actually do. And it's only going to make you a better person to work with as well.
Yep, I agree. I've got a question for you. Okay. Do you have any moments when you think back, I don't know, you don't have to be a kid, but have there been any sort of, do you have any nostalgia around a piece of advertising or like an ad which stuck in your brain and you went, oh, that, I don't know, it's like a John Lewis ad that made you feel like Christmas, or some, do you have an example of something that, you sort of thought, I'd love to be involved in some kind of thing like that at some time?
So I did look back at a few ads. I mean, my memory of the advertising in my childhood is not that great, to be honest. And nowadays, I don't watch that many ads nowadays. Like the way I watch telly, I just circumnavigate the ads when I can. And I'm probably not enough I'm definitely not enough in the advertising industry to kind of go seeking out the good ones out of professional interest. I just don't really do it. Yeah. If I've got a friend who's made something, then I'll always look at their stuff because I'm interested in the work they've done. But I don't really go seeking out the new John Lewis ad for that reason. But looking back at stuff from my childhood, the ones that I thought were great, and I suppose at the time made an impact on me, I think have really dated in the way that an old movie doesn't date necessarily. Yeah. So I was looking at the one of the ones that made a big impact on me, possibly because it was one of the first times I kind of clocked seeing a cinema ad, was the Guinness horses. Yeah, right. Fat Planet. Which at the time I thought was a masterpiece. And now I watch it and I just think, and there's not much to it, really. Yeah. It's beautiful imagery, it is, but it's very pretentious. I don't think there's any particularly coherent idea in there, really. Something I did watch, which I think has aged beautifully, is the Blackcurrant Tango ad. I don't know if you ever had that over here.
Do you know, in the back of my brain, I feel like I think there's a guy called John Evans. Wasn't he involved in the... no, maybe that was Ribena. Yeah.
Well, tango ads generally were very famous for the tango slap.
Yeah. He's been tangoed.
He's been tangoed, which created like a tabloid outrage over kids just slapping the shit out of each other in the playground. And that's what they were mainly famous for, the orange tango, which is the main tango drink. Do you have tango over here?
No.
Right, okay.
No, we've got Fanta.
Okay. It's a different thing.
It's a different
company. It is a different product. It's not like a rebadge.
Yeah.
And Blackcurrant Tango is like I suppose it's like the weird spin-off.
Yeah.
So this advert is basically a man who's like a head of comms. It starts in an office, head of comms at Tango, and he's receiving a complaint letter, a very polite complaint letter from a French exchange student saying that he tried Blackcurrant Tango and he's not sure about it. It's not for him. And then the thing escalates into him rampaging all the way to the White Cliffs of Dover. An army at his back, Harrier jump jets in the sky, just like shouting across the channel at this French exchange student. And it's a really, it's quite a simple idea really, but technically it is immaculately produced. Like it's got these match cuts that take you from the office, invisible match cuts, take you from the office all the way to the White Cliffs of Dover. Like it looks technically absolutely perfect.
Flawless.
And the weird thing about it is like it's nailed something in the British character, which is definitely still very much alive. It's got a real Brexity flavour to it. It's taking the piss out of that sentiment in British culture, really. Yeah. And before I came here today, I looked it up on YouTube. And a lot like Al Murray, it works on two levels for people. There are people who enjoy it because it's lampooning that character. And there are people who think that everything this guy is saying is absolutely right. And we should be sticking it up the French.
Yeah.
So it perfectly occupies this like middle ground in a way that, like, I have no doubt watching it that it's satirical.
Yeah.
and there are so many people that are enjoying it and taking it absolutely at face value, which makes it even funnier, really. And what I thought was really amazing about that was in how long is it? I think it's a minute long, that ad. It's absolutely nailed something that was true then and is still true today.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know how often you can say that about an advert, really.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything else, to be honest.
Well, I think a lot of advertising these days focuses on the tactical rather than on the brand.
Yeah.
And that definitely, I feel like I've seen that in the somewhere in the deep.
I think it's become quite a classic in the advertising world.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that's definitely been revisited.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time it won awards and stuff.
Yeah.
But it was definitely pretty atypical.
But awards are very political. I think if it lasts the test of time, then it's probably more meaningful. Hey, what about, have there been any greats that you've worked with? We don't really have them here. We've got, in order for people to be successful, they have to leave New Zealand. Often when they come back, they're looking for a more quiet, more subdued sort of a life.
Yeah.
To pick the projects that they can rather than just sort of do everything.
Yeah.
Have you worked with some fantastic, big personalities and stuff, or have you been sort of shunned away in the edit booth and
I don't think so. No one really springs to mind. I mean, I've worked on stuff that involves very big personalities.
Yeah.
I did do a load of commercials for Rolex and promotional work for Rolex, and some of the people they sponsor are pretty insane, like Tiger Woods, Roger Federer, people like that. But I never get near any of these people.
But you do see all of the.
I see pictures of them,
and you see the clips, the top and tails, right? You get sent the rushes.
Yes, I mean it's not anything to tell the grandkids about. It's
waiting for the shot while people do finals. Makeup comes in and does the last.
It's a pretty unglamorous game in that regard.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? It's interesting how you're ultimately, well, I don't want to say you're ultimately responsible, but you sort of get the final pass on what the public is presented, right? And so you're sort of involved heavily in shaping that. I think it's one of the things that a lot of people don't understand probably deeply enough, is that the process of production is, the pre-production is massive. If you don't have that right, it's going to stitch you up on the production. If the production doesn't work out, then there's no chance post-production is going to fix it, unless you totally shift tack, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel the burden of that?
I think sometimes, although I can always compartmentalize it by saying, well, look, I can do the best job I can on something that is fundamentally never going to be any good. Sometimes that's just the way it is.
Yeah. And
sometimes something really has the potential to be great, and that's when it's my job to make sure it fulfills that and unlocks it. And sometimes, 9 times out of 10, it's actually something in between, where there's something good in there, there are some problems in there that you need to sort out, and that's where you really earn your money, I guess.
Yeah.
Solving the problems that, for whatever reason, weren't kind of considered in production or pre-production, or just through no one's fault, just occurred. It rained on the day. You didn't get that shot that needed sunshine. What are you going to do? Yeah.
What if the that's just a dark question.
No, go for it.
No. So what happens though if everything lines up as you think it will, and then the client doesn't like it? What if the subject gets bigger than the brand mission?
Yeah.
How do you have that conversation?
Well, I tend to be one place removed from that conflict. Normally that will be the producer or the director, or the producer and the director, and then a client, and them having to work out, well, okay, if there's a disappointment here, what is the disappointment, and how can we get what we want? I think normally, like most of that, I think is to do with client management, to do with client relationships, to do with like the brief being good in the first place. 9 times out of 10, I think when that happens, it's because the brief was confused, or possibly non-existent. Yeah. Sometimes there's a deadline for production to start. The brief just doesn't turn up really in any meaningful way. So people are like, well, we've got a crew, we've got shoot days booked, we're going to make something, and then the client goes, oh my God, this isn't what I wanted. What's happened?
Yeah.
And it's not really my problem. That's where I'm there to kind of, if anything, if I have a role in that kind of conflict, it is to be a creative mind who's outside that relationship, who can maybe sort of step back a bit and say, well, maybe it can be this, maybe it can be that. Here's what we can do, here's what we can't do.
Yeah.
Be a little bit sort of scientific about it and maybe take some of the emotion out of it. There's quite a lot of like, there's a bit of therapy involved sometimes.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah, I think that's probably one of the big things that I'd say is that people who own brands are usually quite emotionally involved, even if they think they're not.
Yeah.
They're usually more emotionally involved than perhaps they demonstrate up front.
Yeah.
And so you've got to always be a little bit wary of that. And
Well, the classic thing is they don't want to take risks with it. They're very protective of it. They think there's a way of doing stuff and it needs to be done that way. Some brands more than others.
yeah,
And there's always going to be a conflict there with the creatives who don't just want to churn out the same thing that the last agency did for them.
yeah. But of course, it helps if they communicate that.
Yeah, but they don't always have the language to. And, people sometimes do get promoted into a position where they're commissioning stuff or they're on that client side and they don't really understand the limitations, I suppose.
Yeah.
Or once you start going down a track, if you want the thing you're making to be good, you need to know where you're going at the start, really. You need to get that sorted out at the beginning. And it's not obvious to people. And why should it be? Like, if it's not their job to get involved at that stage, it's not self-evident. I think it's only, you'd like to think with most people it will come with experience and maybe getting it wrong once or twice and then going, oh yeah, okay. You need to brief. You just need to brief.
Be more involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said. Hey, what about relationships? How important are they? So, I think I know the answer already from the chat. So, like you said, you followed your nose. It's always been about sort of having conversations and being in the right place at the right time. But how important is it to look after existing clients, groom other ones, to set boundaries, to push back and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, all of that. Like maintaining existing relationships is massive, I think, because that counts for a lot. The more you work with people, the more consistently you work with people, the more trust there is. The more that you know that you work in a way that is compatible with the way they work. If like some people might work in a more chaotic way, that might be fine actually. Like if stuff gets done in the end, maybe it's okay to be chaotic, but it takes the right kind of personality to fit into that and to realize that, maybe there'll be a day or two. You get some jobs where you turn up and there's really nothing to do sometimes. Now you could look at that in any number of ways. You could look at that as, oh great, I'm getting paid to do nothing. Or you could look at that as, well, you're wasting my time. I could have been finishing off that other project that I rushed to finish up so I could come here. It's that kind of thing, knowing how people work, knowing what's expected of you, knowing what you can expect of them. Some people take 2 months to pay. Is that a problem? If it is a problem, maybe you need to avoid that client. If it's not a problem, and if you can absorb that kind of, these very pragmatic things that can really fuck up your life if you are not prepared for them, or just make you unhappy.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, you want to go to work and you want to work with nice people, work on nice stuff, and enjoy the work you're doing. And for that to happen, you just need to be paddling your canoe in the same direction. There's no other way, really. That's the nice thing about being freelance. You don't have to have really these difficult conversations with people. If they think you're not quite for them, that's fine. They don't hire you again. And if you're not really for them, well, that's fine. You just don't really... You make them your second choice or your third choice. And things tend to work their way out that way.
They generally do.
Yeah.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Alex, what a fount of wisdom. A font, perhaps. Not a fount. What's a fount? I don't know. Font of wisdom. Hey, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That's it.
I've enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure having you. And hopefully at some stage before too long, your wife will make you see sense and you can make our shores your home.
I was waiting for that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Alex.
Cheers, mate.
Cool.